Yet again, we're trying to kind of familiarize people around the country because the U.S. House is about to flip and very likely the U.S. Senate is about to flip. There are going to be a slew of efforts like this, very cleverly marketed policies that are going to sound like sugar but are actually going to be poison. Their women's rights are certainly keenly interested in the rights of the women seeking abortions, but not particularly interested in the women who are in utero.
Hello and welcome. I'm Olivia Brown with WJ Now, and today we have a very special guest, Tim Head, who is the Executive Director of the Faith and Freedom Coalition. We had you on the show a couple months ago, and we're glad to have you back.
Well, it's great to be back, and there's plenty for us to talk about. So we'll have to hurry to keep it in your show. These are eventful days in American politics.
It is. We are only 6 days until the election now. It's right around the corner. There are a lot of big issues on the ballot this year, particularly in some states like Michigan, Kentucky, and California. Can you tell us about the abortion laws that are being put into place?
Well, so you kind of have that toggles both ways. In some states, we're seeing what I would consider really, really good, proactive, I think, healthy laws that are state legislatures have put in place. So, places like Kentucky, we have a Democrat governor, but a very strong Republican legislature, and so they're kind of at odds with one another. And so next year's gubernatorial race will certainly be a contentious one. Kentucky has a weird situation where their governor runs in odd years, but the Kentucky legislature runs during even years like this. So, Kentucky's kind of a little bit of an unusual one there. But Arizona, where y'all are based, certainly in Georgia, where we've seen very positive, I think, state legislative efforts that have become very publicly debated, and then certainly places like Michigan where we have pretty unfortunate laws that I think are being pushed by a governor that I think a lot of people are considering probably pretty extreme.
You brought up Arizona, and that reminds me, abortion is not actually on the ballot, but there is a governor's race. And the law that was just put in place that was back from the 1900s, it can be brought up again if a Democrat is put into office. I'm sure there's a lot of other states like that as well.
That's right. So, one of the Supreme Court case that came down this summer, the Dobbs decision has made, once again, for the first time and really for the most part, almost 50 years, has made abortion questions more state-related questions, and so that means it's a bit of a Pandora's box in a lot of different states. And so a lot of elected officials and also a lot of voters across the country are just sort of coming to this realization: oh my goodness, my governor or my state legislature, my state senator, my state House member. That's actually where I need to look now for life-related questions. And so, to your point, in Arizona, it's taken a bit of time, and frankly, I think it'll probably take another cycle before pro-life voters fully sort of internalize that the life question is no longer necessarily a White House, but I would say 80% of these questions are really based in your state house, and so it makes our state house and governor's races that much more relevant and kind of top of mind for a lot of life voters, which is the first time really in a lot of voters' lifetimes that's the case.
As the executive director of the Faith and Freedom Coalition, it blends together Christianity and politics. But what we've seen with the statistics is that 1 out of 3 Christians vote regularly. Do you think that this will change after the Roe versus Wade and Christians know that there will be abortion on the ballot?
So that's a good question, and one of the really, I would say basically the core function of the Faith and Freedom Coalition is to continue this kind of march over time, over decades, to engage people of faith, particularly evangelical Christians and faithful Roman Catholics, at the ballot box in general civics. And so, many, particularly I would say up until about the 80s, there was frankly really paltry performance, electoral performance by a lot of Christians across the United States. That number has continued to rise incrementally over the last roughly 40 to 45 years. But there still is work to be done. And so, encouragingly, as more of those Christians vote at the ballot box and then hold their elected officials accountable, we're seeing more and more positive progress. But to your question and your point, I think that there at a certain point there will become a tipping point where the entire conservative kind of movement really is largely led or driven by either Christians or at least issues that appeal to Christians. And so we're seeing a ton of success on this front, but we still have a little ways to go.
In your op-ed that you recently wrote for the Western Journal, you said that there are two specific issues that Christians should be paying attention to when at the ballot box. Can you explain to our viewers what those were?
Well, I'll even kind of I'll expand it out a little bit. So, clearly the life question. So, all voters, including religious voters, are keenly aware of what's happening in our economy. But I think that issues around life, issues around immigration, issues around education are issues that are really kind of risen to the forefront or the top of mind because we've seen. Frankly, such radical efforts by the political left that are, at the very least, bad policy, but frankly, in many cases, are truly hostile towards people of faith across the country. And so, I think that while we need to be mindful of economic and fiscal matters, absolutely. We're finding that more and more people are interested in immigration policy and education policy, and then also healthcare, particularly as it relates to women and to pregnancy and newborns. And so, it's encouraging that yet again that those issues are becoming more and more sort of top of mind and mainstream. But we're always trying to kind of continue to educate and continue to drive people in those directions of awareness and also where candidates fall on those issues.
You just alluded to the hostility that Christians are facing. How is the government discriminating specifically against Christians?
Well, unfortunately, this is particularly over the last 3 years. I mean, so this is not an unusual phenomenon or not a brand new phenomenon, but we've seen a significant uptick in the last 3 years around not just kind of discriminatory practices around, say, hiring maybe or kind of speech, challenging pastors on certain sermons or what have you. But we're actually seeing physical violence being perpetrated against churches and mosques, Catholic churches, and even some synagogues. And so we've seen an uptick in the last 3 years of about 150, 160 cases of reported vandalism and threats and intimidation. But even the last about 4 or 5 months, over half of those have happened. So we're actually seeing an uptick. And unfortunately, the Department of Justice doesn't seem to want to be bothered with this. These are quintessential hate crimes. Mainline prosecutors really have not done anything about this. There's not one case that's actually had charges filed.
How has the Democrats been legally trying to attack pregnancy resource centers?
Well, I mean, certainly around funding options, either more funding on, from a federal perspective, and in several states, obviously increasing funding, but funding Planned Parenthood facilities, obviously, And then also trying to scrutinize, ironically, they're trying to scrutinize pro-life pregnancy centers in ways that there have been complaints about pro-choice pregnancy centers. What kind of options do they actually present to clients or patients? What is truly kind of the level? What level of medical treatment are they actually getting? Are they seeing physicians? Are they seeing physicians' assistants? Are they seeing nurses? Are they seeing nurse practitioners? What's kind of the level of medical professionalism that clients are experiencing? And so, in many ways, they're kind of putting under the microscope, pregnancy resource centers across the country, which outnumber Planned Parenthood facilities significantly across the country. And so I think that they've kind of gotten the memo that a lot of the actual medical practices or services are superior. And so they're trying to kind of monitor, are there any religious messages that are being required before people get medical services, things of this nature. And really what they're basically doing at the behest of Speaker Pelosi and other leadership within the House is they're trying to essentially to chill any kind of certainly pro-life messages, as well as any kind of religious undertones communicated around pregnancy resource centers across the country. So another kind of indirect or passive effort to squelch again or chill First Amendment or kind of religious speech.
We've been seeing pro-abortionists trying to push for the Women's Health Protection Act. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and why it's actually a bad thing?
Well, I mean, a lot of these kind of well-named, cleverly crafted pieces of legislation, particularly on the federal level, can frequently be wolves in sheep's clothing, as it were. Mm-hmm. And so, a lot of these are yet again, kind of back to that conversation about Planned Parenthood versus the crisis pregnancy centers. They are efforts to kind of saddle federal money with restrictions, as well as very cumbersome reporting requirements to make sure that there are to basically kind of put carrots in place to almost make crisis pregnancy centers into de facto Planned Parenthood centers. In a manner of speaking, their practices would look more and more like Planned Parenthood practices and less like crisis pregnancy centers, just by kind of regulatory or oversight requirements that are even more strenuously kind of added to federal monies.
And this act would, quote, enshrine the abortion rights for women, correct?
That's right. Again, from particularly a regulatory and funding perspective. But as you and I both know, that quote unquote women's rights tend to be in the eye of the beholder, or in this situation, in the eye of the bill drafter. From their women's rights are certainly keenly interested in the rights of the women seeking abortions, but not particularly interested in the women who are in utero who have the ultimate rights in jeopardy. And so, we're yet again, we're trying to kind of familiarize people around the country, not only in this particular piece of legislation, but frankly, because the U.S. House is about to flip, and very likely the U.S. Senate is about to flip. From November until basically Christmas, there are going to be a slew of efforts like this, very cleverly, deftly marketed policies that are going to sound like sugar, but are actually going to be poison, that we're going to see kind of sprinkled throughout, whether it be women's health or border-related issues, education-related issues, foreign policy-related issues. There is an effort to kind of throw the kitchen sink for the next 6 or 8 weeks knowing that the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House are not going to be friendly places for those kinds of ideas in 2023 and 2024.
Thank you so much for joining us, Tim. Always love having you on here.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity, and God bless.
God bless.